The Hillcrest and Wahtoke Railroad is one of the premier scale railroads in the West. This week we're going to talk to Sean Bautista about how he and his wife built this amazing layout.
This is Railroad Showcase.
The 15-inch gauge Hillcrest and Wahtoke Railroad in Reedley, California has been in operation for over 2 decades. We have had the pleasure of knowing these folks almost from the beginning.
I don't really remember the first time that I was at that railroad.
Well, you wouldn't remember because you were very, very young.
Yeah, some of my earliest memories are of the little kid tractor, the pedal cars that the kids could ride down by the creek, the station, obviously, which has always been there, and the hammock on the deck by the pool.
There's a real wonderful family feeling around that railroad. Every spring, they have their Blossom Trail runs, and those culminate in the weekend of Reedley Rail Fest. The Glenwood South Park and Pacific number 13 is the workhorse at Hillcrest. But the Glenwood number 5 and the Vertical Boilered 1 spot also live there now. Visiting for Rail Fest was Redwood Valley Railway number 11. All of these engines gave the public a constant show of trains in motion. During major events, when there are 3, 4, or even 5 trains running on long stretches of bidirectional track, they have a dedicated dispatcher keeping things in order. This weekend was special because they had the official inauguration of their new turntable and their entirely reworked engine house. There are some rail fans who don't really understand the appeal of scale railroading, be it model railroads, large-scale live steam, or the grand scales like 15-inch gauge. But the reality is that a railroad like this is very close to the original operating experience. These trains are almost half the size of narrow gauge equipment, and they operate in much the same way.
I've always had a fascination with the mechanical things that have monkey motion to them, and we normally call that planes, trains, and automobiles. I'm more interested in the history of man's involvement with machine over time and how that translates from, say, like Stevenson valve gear into Walshart's valve gear into Baker valve gear and sort of man's touch on machinery. And I love it. I love all the old guys who have all this knowledge and this whole history that is being forgotten. And to me, that fascinates me. It's like discovering a world that existed that nobody knew about, like in steam. In the engineering, we think of steam engines as being simple, and we're way more modern than that now. But in fact, we have books that go back to the mid-1800s on steam engine design, and it has all the formula, all the engineering in it, and you read through that stuff and you go, these guys were very smart on math, very smart on everything. And it wasn't just they put these things together. It was the best technology at the time and the best they could offer at the time. And to me, that whole history is gone. It's lost. People today, even train enthusiasts, don't know it. And that's always captivated me. Planes for a long time. I built cars for a long time, and then when we moved here on the farm, what really triggered that was we were going to actually live in a community where you land the airplane and taxi the airplane to your house. And for my jobs flying aircraft, that would be very convenient, very cool. And I would be spending my hobby time building experimental aircraft. And saw this farm one day and brought the wife by here, and she said, I want to move there. I don't want to live at this Sky Park. And can we move on the farm? And I told her that day, I said, if we move on the farm, that means I don't get the runway, I don't get the planes at the house, and I don't get to build the experimental aircraft, but that means I get to have a train, right? And of course she thought, yeah, where are you going to put a train around here? So, yeah, sure, you can have a train, whatever. And that started it, and I started looking at different sizes that could fit on this farm, and that would add, it was already a Christmas tree farm, what could we do with the train that would complement that? And the idea was, what if we use the train to pick up people in the fields and their trees and bring them back to where we harvest the trees, where we shake them, drill them, wrap them? Wouldn't that make a neat theme thing, like a logging camp? And so narrow gauge would look better than standard gauge. And we saw this old videotape. I bought it from Pentrax, and it was called Big Little Engines. And on that, noticing that I was trying to get ideas on layout and landscape and room, how much room do these trains need? And I noticed that there was a guy named Eric Thompson, whose name was mentioned at all these different railroads. And then in the interview with Eric Thompson on that tape, he's talking about hiding the piston valves inside the steam chests and all these little tricks he does. And I could tell from that Eric knew how to build trains. This is the guy to go to. And so I called up, I 411 to Redwood Valley, cold call Eric, started talking to him, and then I would take, he invited us up, my wife and son and I went up there and talked to him for the day. And then I would take my crews working here on the farm up to Redwood Valley to help him with track work, just to pick his brain about track. How do you curve rail? How do you make a switch? How do you all those kind of questions. And Eric, he was out there by himself, and being a very nice guy, he accommodated us, and we would trade him work for knowledge. And that's what kind of got us going. And Eric's advice to me was, well, lay your track, build your track 15-inch gauge and lay it to my standards, and buy this little cheap Crown engine out of Illinois. And if you get bitten by the bug, you can always upgrade. And if you find out this isn't worth it, you made a big mistake, he goes, you can always sell it and you'll probably make money. And so I took his advice, and we bought the Crown, we laid the track to his standards and got the train operational. And a few years later, a man showed up, wanted that Crown. And we sold the Crown to him and used that money to start doing our own tooling and create our own train cars. And from that, we started designing our own locomotives, and then we started selling trains to people, and that created the whole, and selling trains to people is what pays for what you see here. So the ticket price really doesn't do it. It's other people's money that builds this Hillcrest and Wahtoke.
So what can you not get for $249?
Oh, there's a lot of things more expensive than $249.
Okay, specifically, you cannot get a box of graham crackers for $249. You want to know what you can get for $249 though? A month full of episodes for Railroad Showcase, which has Graham and Greg.
All righty. Thanks for tuning in.